Okay, everyone, you see once again the chairs behind me. That means we're ready for our next panel. But this time, the panel will not be moderated by me, but rather by Markus Hackmann from the consulting company P3, and they're going to get into how political the EV industry is. So I'm very happy to hand over to Markus, who's going to introduce our topic in more detail and also our panel guests. So Markus, happy for you to take over.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here, Christian, as ever. It's a pleasure. Thank you that all of you are here. We try to have a very, very interesting session. We will have a lively discussion about a topic which matters to all of us. How political is the EV industry and how political should it get? We will talk about different aspects. We will talk about hardware manufacturers, about local content in supply chain. We will talk about what have you learned from the PV industry. We will talk about what have you learned from the battery industry. So we have still some companies from Asia in Europe. We have still some European big players for batteries. Then we will come to energy market regulation. We talk quite a lot about vehicle to X, and I think this is very important for all of us. So how is the future on the energy market, and what can everybody of us do for a nice future? And then it's more a dry topic, but the regulation is very important for many of our topics, and we also want to discuss these topics. How can regulation help us to do the next step? And if I frame it a little bit, we should ask the question, is the European strategy of complete openness the right way to go, or has the time come for Europe to think about what role will it play in the future, or will companies move around like it is and everybody is happy like it is? So we will see how the discussion goes on. We will be happy about your questions, and I am very happy that I can discuss all of these topics with three excellent panelists, and I would like to introduce all of them. First panelist is Lucy Matera. Lucy is Secretary General of Charge Up Europe, the voice of the EV charging infrastructure industry. Lucy has an extensive political and policy background. She's very committed in the EV charging industry, and she's working for a seamless charging experience and a consumer-centric open market model. Next one is Alexander Reich. He's a board member of the Polish Alternative Fuels Association. Alex has 15 years of experience in the energy financial market with focus on corporate communication and public affairs. He's also a well-known expert for the international affairs, project management, and EU regulations, also in the battery sector, and a tech enthusiast who's managing his own new tech projects. And last but not least is Klaas Bracklow, I think well known for most of you. Klaas has different topics, and I don't have to read it because I know Klaas since many, many years. He's also a car guy, an electronic expert. Then he was at the VDA in different topics, very, very active. He's chairman of Sharon, doing many, or pushing many things for all of us in the market. And actually, Klaas is the policy director at BMW. And I'm very happy to have all of you with me. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much. I will also sit down. Yeah, it's very good to have you here. I think Marianne is sitting like this. I watched her very closely. So, first thesis, what we have prepared for all of you is a thesis. What is the market for charging hardware, and is it comparable with the PV industry? All of you know PV industry is not the best example for the European future. But actually, we should ask the question, what's about charging and hardware topics? And Lucy, due to the fact that you have a very good EU overview, what do you see as a main risk for the EU companies in this increasingly political environment?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marcus. Hi, everybody. Sorry. So at ChargeUp, of course, we very much believe in the idea that you need to keep a strong manufacturing footprint in Europe. Of course, that's one of our criteria, actually, to join, the membership of ChargeUp Europe. The question that you're asking, it's happening against a broader political backdrop. You're having a lot of political discussion. Those are informed by, the PV industry example that you just mentioned. And what we are seeing is that in the past, it used to be that Europe wanted to encourage manufacturing on its soil, mostly via a horizontal approach. So you were looking at, shaping horizontal framework conditions through, competition instrument, through deepening the single market. We're actually moving away. We're seeing EU political leaders moving away from that approach toward a slightly newer approach where they are trying to create ecosystems, right, with vertical sectoral instruments favoring specific industries, specific projects. Okay, so that's a shift, and I think it's quite significant. It's mostly affecting EVs today, not yet the hardware manufacturers, but that might come in the future. In terms of risks, I would put that in two main buckets. One is retaliation. So we have a trading relationship with, third countries. Those countries have agency. They can decide, well, if Europe is going to put up trade measures, countervailing measures, I'm going to do the same. And we saw that in July, right? We saw that with China when they decided to restrict export of gallium, germanium. That's going to affect EVs, communications, missiles, a range of, of technologies. Yeah. So your first risk is around retaliation. I would say your second risk is around market distortions at home. And that would play in different ways. So that newer approach that I've described, you're basically picking winners, right, in the industry, specific winners in technologies, etc. You're moving away from the approach that we've had in the past, which is about technological neutrality, which has actually given a lot of growth, right, in Europe. There's always the question of what do you do with early stage technologies that by definition will not be on the radar of EU policymakers. Your second your second issue, how that's going to distort the EU market is if you try to encourage that via national subsidies, right? And how do we know that we'll have a distortive effect? It's because of the lessons we got from COVID, right? So we loosen, the competition framework during COVID, 80%, right, of the financial firepower that would freed up during COVID, that went to German and French companies. So, good for them. They won the passport lottery. Anyone who's not a French or German company, that's a little bit unfortunate. You're going to talk about CE countries. None of them can compete with that kind of financial power. And the third way you can have that market distortion with a newer approach is, of course, if you're getting support from public authorities, that will come with strings attached, and they're going to be a little bit more intrusive in your business operation and a little bit more directing about what they want to get from you in exchange for that public support. Yeah,
thank you very much, Lucy. Klaas, as you have a very broad overview on all of these topics and many years of experience, and with charging, most of your members, and most of your members tackle also this situation. And as we discussed yesterday, we framed it as a kind of SWOT, and you say, hey, we should focus maybe on our strengths and also on the opportunities. So can you maybe summarize a little bit what are our USPs in Europe, and what are these strengths and opportunities for the different companies?
Yeah, thanks, Markus, for this nice question. And we see that here. So that is our strength, to have that network. So we are here for the 11th time in period, and that was original when we started with electromobility, and together with European regulation and funding and technology, and what our big asset is. So that is experience and the cooperation of customers and suppliers. So we have had plenty of projects with EVSE suppliers together with OEM in many dimensions and in different projects, and all trusting on technology and standards. And so we are in the market for more than 11 years. And what we all did is this iterational work to optimize the UX, to discuss about, we have been the first pushing for the high power charging. And that has been, still a big market lead. So we have seen Chinese and Japanese activities. And so we have been on the frontier of technology by supporting high power charging. That went together with technology, with power modules, with efficiency, and that is, from my perspective, the interaction of industry, the cooperation between different brands, and we are all dedicated to a CO2-free mobility and supporting that. So we have a couple of new members and from different countries within Sharin, and they are mainly wondering, what are they doing here? How do they make it? And to have that spirit, how can they compete without aiming for getting it all? And that is, to my perspective, our asset, to cooperate on technology, to share a vision, and to compete hard as we are used to have that in the industry.
All right. Thank you, Klaas. Alex, I think I have maybe two questions for you. First question, which we can discuss, of course. What do you think, how dependent are we already from other markets? Mentioned Asia, pretty clear, China, but also what do you think about the US market? I think we haven't discussed it that deep on this conference already, but the US market is coming definitely, and partnerships are coming. Governmental support is huge in the US. It would be lovely to get an overview and opinion of you from this.
All right, thanks. Well, it's a great question. I think that's the political question of the political on the topic. So, I represent 250 companies as PSPA that are from the entire value chain of e-mobility. So the automotive, the charging, the batteries, logistic retailers, everyone. So we really see the effect and the impact, I think, of what you're asking in all these areas. And in terms of the U.S., I think of course, it's the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the main thing we're talking about here. So it's above $1 trillion, as we know, of dollars of support and subsidies and tax reductions and exemptions. And of course, we can ask ourselves whether this is the true, factor that attracts investment, and we see that it is. It's really taking a lot of investment away from Europe towards the United States. And this dependency you're asking for in terms of the US, I would say it's less of a dependency, it's really a strive for competitiveness in the EU. And I represent Central Eastern Europe as Poland, the largest market of that region. And obviously, for us, we see that there is a dual problem. So one problem is the European Union and its competitiveness versus these global dominant markets. Yeah. But the second area is Central Eastern Europe versus old EU, because obviously some of the subsidies that are offered within the Net Zero Industry Act, for example, which is, by 2030 supposed to reach, 600 billion euros, apparently quadruple that by 2050. We're seeing that will not have the same significant impact in the CE as it will in the old EU markets, simply because of the economic potential that is currently present in those markets. So we, for Poland, I think it shows best where we are. We have a 20 million vehicle market with 43,000 electric vehicles. It's a nascent market. Yeah. 2,953 charging stations for a huge country like this is very small. So we need to attract investment. But of course, our supportive potential for this is much less. Meanwhile, we see that by 2030, this whole industry can generate 6% of our GDP. And I think this is very similar for the entire European Union. Yeah. But of course, it will impact how we plan things. And in terms of how dependent we are, well, for the EV industry, of course, we have the lithium-ion batteries. Now, Poland is very strong in this. We're number 1 in Europe. We're number 3 in the world. 6% of the global share. But this will change. This will change, and I think a lot of these things will shift towards the old EU countries. We know that within the end of this decade, we will have 6 out of the 10 biggest battery producers in Europe, but that might not be the CEE.
Yeah.
So we are dependent on China in this way, but we need to understand one thing. For example, there's a lot of discussions on the availability and access to lithium. But the problem is not the access to the actual ore. It's the problem with refining the ore. And this is the might that China has. So I think this is what we need to look at, is not competing in terms of, and working around this domination in terms of fighting with it, but really finding our place, our specialty. And I think we can do that. In batteries for Poland, battery management systems, thermal sensors, casing, we can do all that. With charging infrastructure, we have friends here at the ICNC with software, with some of the stuff they deliver that we can really be specialized and unique in. Yeah. And this way we can really, I think, change this dependence into a vital cooperation, where the EU is the vital component of that global value chain.
Yeah. And I promise to ask you a second question. It's also complicated, as it should be. From an investor perspective, what is important to know for many of these innovative companies, what they should do for charging hardware and other innovative stuff in Europe? What should they also learn, what investors need?
Well, I mean, that's another difficult question, because I think for various markets there are various needs. For what I can say for the Central Eastern European region, which I think is one of the biggest growing regions, yeah, one of the most promising regions, is definitely that we need to understand that we need to change our energy mix very quickly. So we have a boost of PV, which you said we're also going to talk about it. 395% growth in 5 years of private PV installations, but we still cannot give them off to the grid because the grid is not resilient enough. I think it's the same problem everywhere. So we need to drive this kind of innovation. So, a lot of this is related to what the actual market can offer. And I think renewables is number 1, and this is very important to change the energy mix. To give you a perspective, Poland has an energy mix 80% dependent on coal. Until 2021, this coal was delivered from, let's say, the eastern direction. So it's a very big challenge for us, right? And it's the same all over these regions. So these investors need to know that it's a very stable market, a market that believes in this kind of development. And I think Poland shows it. We use 90 million euros of subsidies for charging infrastructure for new stations in 14 days. So it shows that the hunger of the market is huge and the investments are coming in, but we need to do more to support them. And this is a political factor as well, because the policies need to be in place.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. Lucy, maybe can you give us an example of what you learned and your members? What is the US and China doing better as the European companies?
Yeah, sure. I can just complement what you said, right, Alex, especially on ARA. So ARA, the focus has been very much on the volume, right? So it's the financial firepower that is available. That is one part of it, of course. You do have some research that has been carried out by Bruegel, which is a good economic think tank in Europe, that says, well, actually the funding that is available in the US and in Europe is quite similar. I'm not going to vote for that research, it's not Startup Europe research, but their main conclusion was what's different is how easy it is to access the American funding compared to the EU funding, which is completely fragmented. It's, big, you need 3 PhD to understand how that works. Also, the EU funding is geared toward innovation, whereas the US funding is geared toward deployment. And that's, again, a big difference. Another factor that I think is a little bit overlooked, and that I think is a good practice from the US, they're stronger on governance. They're already leading on, they've just established not so long ago that joint office of energy and transport that is to get rid of the siloed thinking that's hurting so much our industry. Our industry is about integrating energy and transport via digital means, right? We're very much hurt in Europe by that completely siloed thinking, and they're trying to move away from that with the joint, office, right? And that's one example. The other one, going back to IRA, it's not just the financial firepower that you have, it's also the governance around it. They have nominated John Podesta. He's a senior advisor reporting directly to President Joe Biden. He's in charge of the implementation of IRA. He's also chairing the National Climate Task Force. And that's also going to give you that delivery architecture, beyond the, the financial kind of full force, the volume that you have, making sure that actually has impact. And I think we can learn from that in Europe, especially on that governance front. On China, I think it's a little bit more of a, it's a different market, as we all know. I think you have data that's still compelling, right? That's I think is interesting for everybody. You have Goldman Sachs data that is telling you, it only takes a third of the time for China to build an EV factory compared to other countries. It is 80% more expensive in the US to build a battery factory compared to China. So those numbers are quite compelling. I don't think we're going to converge toward China, but there's probably room for improvement. I think what China is, it's a constant reminder of how important it is to have a deep domestic market pool. Right, and that that helped a lot with the scale, right? Especially in the PV industry in the past. And so the question is, okay, how do you replicate in Europe that deep market pool, especially through the single market, which is still completely fragmented, to try to have the same market conditions that are conducive to growth for our sector?
All right. Thank you. So time is running, and Alex, thankfully you tackled already the second question about batteries, because you're a battery enthusiast like I am. But first question, Klaas, as I mentioned, you had different jobs, and BMW, in my opinion, is doing a different job than others. They do a lot of partnerships, especially with their sales strategies. As very much public presented that we have different cell suppliers, that we don't go with just one or two cell suppliers. And also, which is very, very nice, BMW was very early partnering with Northvolt. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do. Do you think about the different strategies of the OEM in terms of battery and especially cells? And what is your opinion? Is this a kind of, are there different strategies, or are there just one strategy like competition in terms instead of competition? It would be nice to have a short framing about this topic from your position.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I would emphasize on this topic of competition. And that is what we see in Europe, in our industry, so that we are driving technology and innovation by competition and by different approaches. And that is, from my perspective, a significant factor for success, to have that and not to be clear by 100% and to know everything in advance. And that is a disadvantage of those countries where the prime minister knows everything and has some dumb people around being happy to be blessed by the president. And so that happens within BMW and Volkswagen and Mercedes as well. And that is a strength of our industry. So I'm meanwhile 32 years in that business, and that has been up to now our strength, and to have a very strong competition, to work together on standards and technology, to agree to prepare the market entrance, and with different strategies of those companies, so we can determine our success, because it's not so easy to understand for everybody, and probably that helps at the end to figure out what is the best strategy. And so as long as we are focusing on competition, that is good. But meanwhile, so we are in a bit different environment, and have to ask ourselves, is competition the only value, and isn't it necessary to found specific European strategies in addition to that?
Yeah. And I mean, as I said, BMW has many partnerships. First of all, and Alex, you also mentioned, I mean, Poland was very early to look for the right champions in the cell industry, and you started very early, and you just mentioned that there was a way to go. So what are your learnings from this very early partnership?
This is true indeed, yeah. So right now, we've developed the battery industry into a source of 2% of our annual export value, so it's significant. And as I said, we have this global market share, but we know that Poland alone will not probably be a contender in terms of volume. So we wish to see not only Poland, but European Union, Central Eastern Europe as a contender in terms of competence. So an example I can give from our operations every day is our partnership with the European Battery Alliance and the Academy, and really developing this competence and this kind of startup potential, as I said, delivering this specialty that we can have, because we have manufacturing sites, of course, but we're now looking at recycling sites, right? So being able to use the synergies offered by the European battery regulations, by the Raw Materials Act, the Critical Raw Materials Act, that can provide us with our space within the global battery value chain. And I think this is our learning here, that we will not reinvent lithium-ion chemistry. We will not probably deliver the first solid-state batteries, but we can deliver the best specialists, the best workforce, the best competence, not only as Poland, but I think as the EU, because this is something that I'm trying to really put across here, that Central Eastern European countries and all the EU countries, we need to really understand we're one market in this global competition, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think what is also very important, we have already a kind of European champion in battery cells with Northvolt, and the question is, how does this come from? And this question will go to myself, so I will sit like this. For Northvolt, and what can you learn from Northvolt? So it's a Swedish company, as probably most of you know. Northvolt started very early. They have with Peter Carlsson, a guy who was with Tesla before, learned quite a lot in the US, even how to scale business. So they started with not much, very gigawatt hours, and then the first gigawatt factories came to the market, and then Peter decided, supported by the Swedish government, hey, I can do this on my own, and we need local content in Sweden with battery cells. And in the beginning, of course, everybody said, okay, battery cells, this technology is Asian. All the champions came from Asia, but Peter said, okay, I will give it a try. And there were the right investors who support Peter with this. And then, as you can read in the press articles, he has many, many contracts with European OEMs. And this is maybe a good example how to believe in the vision, stay strong, and then try to scale up. The production hell was mentioned by Elon Musk, but the production hell is also in hardware, charging hardware manufacturing. I had many talks about this and other topics. So I think in research and development, we are very good in Europe, but next is production, is the scale up of a product. And therefore you need very good investors, and you have to convince different investors. And then you have to succeed, you need to deliver. You need to be a real delivering machine. And I think if you look it up, there is a lot to learn from the Northvolt story. And nobody knows if it will succeed in the end and how big will Northvolt be. But actually, they are very strong in the market with a product. Alex,
I just want to add, because
I'm a moderator now. What do you think about it?
Well, Northvolt, of course, it has a site in Poland, as you know, in Gdańsk, with energy storage solutions and heavy machines, batteries, which I think is also really interesting how electromobility can spread into the energy sector and stabilizing the grid and all those solutions. And I think Northvolt is one of those drivers. But what I think is very interesting is that they're doing this whole closed cycle, right? So they're doing from the resource through the manufacturing all the way through recycling, which is exactly, I think, the factor that will drive competitiveness in this sector. So this is, I think, an interesting model.
Yeah, to have the whole value chain and a kind of local content. Yeah, that's something we can learn as well. Okay, the third thesis was about the energy market regulation. We talked a lot about charging in relationship to the energy market. We had some nice presentation in the morning by E.ON, which are talking about dynamic tariffs in charging and also about bidirectional charging. So first of all, and then there was a question about regulation. The smart meter rollout was totally different, and Ian also said, okay, I can just do what I can do, but I'm not a political guy, so the smart meter rollout is nothing. I have to take it like it is. But Lucy, as you have a good view on the EU activities, what do you think? What are the learnings for regulation authorities for boosting and not hindering innovation?
Yeah, so I know you like learning. Sometimes you learn from abroad, and sometimes you just learn from yourself and the past and your past mistakes. And probably energy market regulation would fall in that category, right? So the vision of a grid that is flexible, that is digital, that is more modern, that is smart. It's not a new vision, right? It's been around for a while, but we're still some distance from the actual seeing that in practice. Okay. So why are we not seeing that more? Let's say your first issue, your first concern should be around policy consistency, right? And we're not there yet in Europe. You were mentioning, storage, energy storage. You know where I'm going with this, right? You still have a framework on energy taxation that was developed in the early 2000s, right? And that can actually lead to double taxation of storage technologies because at the time they, weren't really there, right? And some member states will allow for exemptions, some member states will allow for reduction, which will then lead you to, a second problem, which is your fragmentation of single market and the issue of enforcement and implementation, right? You do have a framework that is quite good today, actually. If you look at the framework as it stands, you have more than 20 articles on flexibility, which is quite good. It's just not transposed, or it is just not enforced, right? And you have national regulatory framework, at the national level that will allow for the active participation of EV owner, in flexibility mechanism. But that's only possible in 9 countries, which means that you have 2/3 of EU countries where that just won't happen. And you have research from the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, that is showing that you have over 140 smart tariffs that are available in Europe. Unfortunately, they're all, on offer in Nordic countries and in Western Europe. And so again, you have that issue of complete fragmentation of the single market, which I think is very much a hindrance. Your second lever to sort of address that topic is governance. And I know it's a very boring topic, but it's actually quite important. A few weeks ago, CERT, that's the Council of European Energy Regulators, issued a report. And in that report, you have a list of initiatives, action, best practice that national regulatory authorities on energy have taken at the national level to try and promote EV uptake, basically, right? And that's all very good. And if you read through those initiatives and best practice, they're all quite good. They all make sense. But they do not add up to a systemic, structural, transformative response at all, for the grid. And why is that? It's because if, France has a good idea, right, they're going to implement that in France, and you don't have a governance, in place to make that not just a French story, but an EU story. And so your last lever, so to speak, to sort of improve the situation here, just hardcore market reform, and that's very much a live discussion at the moment in the EU. It's ongoing. It's not a discussion that is in a very happy place politically for the moment, but it is happening. There are discussions that are ongoing to provide a better assessment of the flexibility needs for the future and how you're going to respond to that. There's a lot of very good provisions that are envisaged and that are being discussed. We see where that lands. It's a little bit blocked at the moment, but there's good promises in those reforms that are shaping up.
All right, thank you. And if it comes to energy market class, we made our own experience in the last 5 weeks because we're actually working very deep dive. We try to succeed in bidirectional charging, and therefore we need different parties. And I think we learned quite a lot about the energy market. So, Klaas, what is your learning out of this, and what could be the right pathways for a future which is combined of all the different interests?
Yeah, that is what I'm very curious about, because I'm coming from this car industry, very competitive, working global, so we all find our place to do that. And so when I came to the energy business almost 5 years ago, so how can we interconnect the electric vehicles with the grid? So I had to learn so that there is a other world around with other rules, and that is my learning, so that countries and even specific areas in different countries tend to wanting to have the full control of the grid. And so that is that perspective on countryside, on control mechanisms. So that is the negative. So we have these 800 grid operators in Germany. So that is the most challenging one. We have a couple less in Great Britain, and so as we heard today in Denmark, it seems to be easier. And but I'm thinking, so we can make out of that story a success again, because the complexity to make energy services possible in a competitional scene is that what we are faced to, and so we need to force a bit, so to get from the selfish country nationwide position to enable our industry to make business out of that, because if we don't make that, somebody else will do that later on, and that comes back to my first time. So if we have the appropriate regulations making business out of that, it's driving innovation, and at the end it gives us a market advantage for those things. And so that is my learning. When we started with the AFID regulation for charging, so we decided on the connector, so okay, high power is feasible, so that is my learning, so that gives us an advantage over the others. But for those subjects, going back to vehicle to home, as we heard of today, so that seems to be somehow feasible. So we have different interacting parties from the scene with pilot projects. So we are close to mass adoption of that. But to bring that on the European level is a real challenge, because we want to travel with our vehicles through Europe. And so if we have that, so it looks sometimes like a train system where we have to change the train to go to the next country. And what my important point is on that, let's make use of the user-centric position, because that is, from my perspective, something unique in Europe. So we want to have data accessible for our inhabitants. We want to make data transparent. And we want to give some power to the end customer. And that is the advantage guided by our Green Deal regulations, our CO2 savings, and making that business case for the end customer. If that is our driver, so that helps everybody. So the grid, the customer, and at the end, the innovation, because that is innovative new business models, and we have the capabilities within the complexity of our country organization in Europe and our setting of industry. And I assume personally, so that works quite well to have that in a competitive area, so where we don't have a one-shop stop for body to go to the what is state grid or whatever. So that is the easy game. So that gives an advantage to them. But as I learned, complexity helps if you can manage that, and if that is our main messages and getting support for that, I'm positive for the future.
Okay, thank you, Klaas. Alex, you mentioned the upsides of the EU, which are definitely there, but Klaas just mentioned also downsides. What do you think? What regulation hurt the EU? Because of the many different states and activities compared to the US and China, which is both compared very centralized.
Yeah, well, comparing the US and the EU to the Chinese way of regulating things is a little bit difficult, because it's a little bit easier to regulate issues in China. I think in the EU, so I'm a big enthusiast, and obviously as the Polish and the CEE new mobility environment, we're huge enthusiasts of EU policy, especially the one in place right now. So it's difficult to criticize. I would say we're not maybe critical, but we're definitely looking for more with acts like the Net Zero Industry Act, with the support that's needed, because obviously we need to balance very well between the bonus-malus, so the support and the limiting of business. So limiting, of course, everything that comes into Europe and promoting what is European. I think we need to balance that. So I think it should do more than just develop competence and have goals like 100,000 skilled engineers within 2025. I think those goals have to be much higher within the Net Zero Industry Act. I think I know we were discussing GDPR and some other regulation before that was in some ways slowing down business, but I think really the Fit for 55 package and what's being introduced now, and boosting the regulations within the RED 3 iteration in terms of the energy market, and all those tools that are available there, I think they're good. I think those targets should be as ambitious as they can be for all areas of green industry, new mobility, and everything that's around it. But I think we should do more to support investment coming into Europe, because as we're saying, right now, we are not seeing that support being there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Alex. If we come to our last thesis, it's about norms and regulation. So Klaas, you have a long relationship to these topics. What do you think, what are the changes also in the last 5 years, and what will be the changes in the next 5 years? And what do you expect, which will these affect the EU and also Western companies?
Yeah, that is something which is really driving me personally, because I believe in the knowledge of the world, and if we put people together to develop technology for the sake of the end customer, for the environment, it makes sense to collaborate in these international norms and standard groups, and so that is always a fight for the best technology. And that has been influenced for the car industry from Europe, Germany. So we send our people in that, but that is till now quite democratic to explain your technology, convince others, and that is for the sake of the industry. So if you could align on global technology, it makes it possible to make a phone call worldwide. So that is a big success. And so that was mainly influenced from the traditional car electronics and even electromobility scene from Europe, Germany, with a very broad knowledge brought into these standardization groups. And that has been based again on competition, so we have not been paid for that. That was the typical order for the industry to align, to bring engineers in to develop that. And what I'm seeing meanwhile, so that specific regions, governments tend to make a bit more local flavored. And what does it mean? So you can control a bit of import and export. If we are coming to charging infrastructure, it's easy. If we have a good border, you can't pass by. So that was a great success for Europe. So we have that free travel. We have the same technology supported by regulation for Europe, and within this family of charging technology, where charging stands for, that is a global alignment of the industry. So, okay, if we all can concentrate on that, that gives us an advantage, because we can compete with the customer and not with a country leader or something like that. And the tendency I see, so that is a political instrument meanwhile to say, okay, I'm defining the technology for my country because I expect from my people getting an advantage out of that. And I see a lot of money flowing into the standardization groups, so that is strategically funded. And we are still on our competitive stuff and believe so that future could exist for the next couple of years. And that is a kind of adjustment we should do to play on a level playing field, and not to believe that our success factor technology standards are coming from Europe and conquering a free world with an open discussion. So we have to face that, and probably so we should be a bit more strategic on that, and not say, okay, Europe is a competitional area, and America is America, and China is making China. So that is probably not the best solution, not on political perspective, but also not on industry perspective, because every standard and every technology causes extra efforts for engineering, extra testing, so the quality could not be as good as possible. The scaling factor is different. So that means, in principle, from industry perspective, it's stupid what we are seeing in the market. But if that happens, so we have to sharpen our weapons or to align on other strategies a bit to be at the end in this competitional area we are able to face.
Okay, Thank you. And before we come to the questions from the audience, last question, Lucy, for you. When you think about your members, what do you think about standardization? Requires it more or significant more standardization activities, or are you fine with it how it is?
Yeah, I actually want to react to what you just said, Klaas, on that we need a more strategic approach, right, to standards. Back in a previous professional life, I was working for the US Department of Commerce, which has jurisdiction on standards. And it's always striking for me the discrepancy between how we're approaching standards in Europe and how the US is approaching standards. In the US, they're very straightforward about it. This is about establishing global domination of markets via technological superiority, and they completely own it, and that's their approach. That decision is not going to be taken by a low-level junior officer in a small office on the first floor. That's not how it's done, right? Those decisions are made directly by the Secretary of Commerce or people around him. So that's sort of the level where it's being made. And I just think in Europe we're not quite there yet. We have we do have discussion on standard, we have decision on standard. I'm just not sure they have the same political visibility and the same sort of strategic drive behind them.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Lucy. I see the guys with the microphone well positioned, and we would like to answer your questions. I have to sit. All right. Are there any questions? Are there any critical questions which we could discuss together? We have some time left. Left side.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Claudio from Ridergy here. And I was wondering, especially, why is it so hard to transpose all these regulations or enforce them from the EU and the member states? Why is it taking so long? What's missing? How can that be accelerated? Is there anything that is also being done to accelerate these transpositions?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because it's a kind of summarized question. So, Klaas, what is your top wish for this?
Yeah, that is definitely to speed up on that, but that is from our history in Europe. So we have had this creation of Europe with these individual units, and so we tend as individuals to keep that system alive. And our strength is at the end to combine that. We have good examples. So that is the AFI, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, which gives a really good direction to everybody and to every national country, and that was a painful time to come to that point, but that shows me it's possible, and the only point is how to speed up. So we tend to discuss, to respect the other, to get the influence, to go back, and so that has been our success story, to have all these positions taking our time, but that seems not to be appropriate for now, and we have just to learn how can we speeding up with respect to our old talents we already had, and so that is this black and white, and I love this intermediate position. It must be possible not to be too fast, but not to stay too long on these low speed regulations, but the AFIR makes me promising, and so even if we are discussing on card readers and roaming and whatever, so at the end, so we have a good agreement alignment in Europe, and it's possible, and from heart, my wish is to bring that to the energy system interconnection with these huge amount of battery performance we are bringing to the market, and then that is our duty, to make use of produced batteries and raw material, not just to drive the car from one corner to the next, to make that possible, and that is inhabitants, that is environmental, that is industry, that's bringing money, innovation, and that is a perfect fit. I do not know who is kicking whom to what part of the body, but that is in principle the demand of our European inhabitants to our governments. Okay, we want to have that, and as we heard, the customer is demanding V2Home and V2G, so the technology is available, and thanks for making my wish more strong with your question.
Yeah, thank you. Lucy, you're in the heart of the EU in Brussels. Do you have some real levers which we can steer to be better on standardization activities?
Well, just to go back to the question from the gentleman over here, so you mentioned AFIR and Klaas, and so there's also a simple question of what is the legislative instrument that you are using AFIR used to be called AFID, right? So it was a directive. So you have different instruments, and they leave different room for maneuver, to member state and national government to adapt and, take some liberties sometimes. With ChargeUp and, other organizations, we called for AFID, the directive, which left a lot of room for maneuver to the member state to become AFIR, a regulation which is a little bit more binding, a little bit more directly applicable, precisely to limit those deviations that you're mentioning, or the time that it takes for instrument to become applicable in the member state. And I think it's it's one of the positives of the change that has been adopted, that you have something again that is more binding and that will have effect more quickly and in a way that is more harmonized. Going back to your point of harmonization across Europe, that will give you that.
All right. We have also a second question here.
Hello, Arne Richters from EVBox. Really nice panel discussion. Really good to hear that collaboration is indeed a European strength. I couldn't agree more. My question is actually something that might still be a concern. There's a tremendous growth in our industry. I think we all celebrate that. There's large EV charging networks that are cross borders that are increasingly being rolled out. They are the perfect marriage between the transport sector, the energy sector via digital. They're digitally run. You need to protect that environment via cybersecurity because it's critical infrastructure in Europe, right? It's an increasing case, I think, that our industry is making. We're collaborating, but there's also a lack of standardization here. So basically, my question is that a topic you guys are leaning in on and educating policymakers on, or is it one that keeps you awake at night? Because these cross-border networks are, critical, and they need to be made cyber secure. And the NIS directive at the European level is definitely one up for review, and I think our industry needs to lean in on this rather quickly. What's your view?
Thank you. Who would like to take this not that easy question?
Well, I think I can start. I think in reference to the first question, definitely the Fit for 55 package saw the problem that you're identifying. You see the CO2 standards for both passenger vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles. You see AFIR turning into AFIR. You see the European battery regulation. They're all regulations. So they have direct implementation and sanctions, adding on to what Lucy said. I think in terms of standards, in overall terms, I would democratize them. So that's my take on that issue. I think we have a common goal. We need to pursue it together and then work out the different technologies we may supply. What Arne asked, I think, is something that's a little bit of the problem we have, that we're still on the 14 acts of the Fit for 55 package here, just really establishing a base to develop e-mobility and free e-mobility to thrive. And then we need to look at the cybersecurity, which I agree needs to be tackled. I wouldn't standardize it differently, though, because we're a common market, and I think interoperability and roaming solutions will, of course, be based on the fact that we're sharing this network and we're keeping it a seamless network. So it's a huge challenge. I don't think the regulators in Brussels still have an idea on how to address this, because they're so deep into looking at charging infrastructure, and some problems are, hiccups like the synthetics that just came on the scene, and we have to deal with that. So before we're going to get into cybersecurity, it's still going to be a couple of months ahead. I'm not even sure in this term of the European Parliament. I have one wish, though. I have a wish, and we have elections in Poland. We have elections in the European Union. I would like these policies, these very ambitious policies, to remain longer and long-term and lasting. Because if we keep on changing them every couple of years with new terms of parliaments, we're not going to really accelerate this process.
Okay, yeah, it's very interesting. Any other comments, or should we go to the next question?
Yeah, for that specific point, I would add that. So, and that's what we did in China. We started 2 years ago a cybersecurity task force to clarify the technology. That is not politics, but our assumption is, so if we can achieve to align on a common understanding and technology, so that is a driving factor, because that is a service to governments. Okay, you don't need to do nothing. It's already decided. No, we don't say it's already decided. You have the opportunity to go left or all right. And so that is what we are addressing, and that is what is necessary now. And so we are more confident with charging processes, products are available, and so we are digging deeper into these technology. And recently we expanded the scope of charging, so that is not longer we care for green mobility, so we care for green mobility in an energy environment. And so that is crossing the border is always difficult, but it's necessary to involve more people because the system borders are not as close as somebody wishes.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 2 minutes left. Are there any questions left so far? Did I miss someone? No, just shout here. It's not that crowded again. Everybody is jumping for food. So we had 2 of 3 wishes, if I count right. All right, Lucy, your wish, last final words for a better future.
So you were mentioning what regulation can bring. There's still some progress, right? Ideally, our members, CPO, the MSP, the hardware producer, they should operate in an environment that makes it frictionless for them, right? We're not at the stage of, frictionless at all, right? It's an industry with a lot of friction, and a lot of it is actually coming straight from regulation that is not adapted, or procedures that are not adapted. There's this thing of, where does your global competitiveness come from? Human capital, sure, there's nothing you can do short-term here. Funding, we're running out of money, basically, the EU. You're left with a regulatory framework. How do you better leverage that? And one way is, again, aim for something that is frictionless for those companies.
All right. Thank you very much for the final words of this panel session, and I will hand over to someone who can moderate much better than I do, and I'm happy if you can take over, Marianne.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Let's have a round of applause for this fantastic panel, first of all.